So, what people will get from this training is a much broader and in depth, detailed understanding of the physiology of stress, how stress affects the mind body system. So, for this training, we have 10 pre recorded presentations, some taught by Charlotte, some taught by myself. And four of those really deal with go into great detail really about the physiology, not just of stress, but of course the implications of stress and also the kinds of things that affect the way in which we as individuals experience the world and therefore maybe more primed to receive stimuli as a stressor, i.e. trauma. So one of the talks that Charlotte gives is on trauma, although this is not a trauma training, so we don't go into huge detail, but of course trauma is part of the picture. Trauma will always be in the room, whether that's an in-person room or a Zoom room, or whether you're working one-to-one with somebody. Trauma is pretty much, I would say probably 98-99% of the time, part of the picture. So we look at how that impacts the way in which the physiology of individuals and indeed communities and systems, and how we then that can prime us to experience the world in such a way that actually we receive things as stressors, or we experience them internally as stressors, even if they're externally not seen in that way by others. We look at the physiology of inflammation. Of course, that's kind of the sister of stress, if you like, and of course it's epidemic. I mean, we have an epidemic of stress and inflammation, and it's just the root cause, or one of the root causes of most of the diseases, the non-communicable diseases, which are the main diseases that we struggle with and suffer from, and indeed die from in the West. And it's definitely part of the picture of fatigue conditions. We also look at polyvagal theory in some detail as another model of, so this is the more kind of contemporary ways of looking at the mind-body structure and how stress affects the way in which we move, the way in which we, or don't move for that matter, the way in which we breathe, the way in which we interact with the world around us. So polyvagal theory is covered as well. We look at different kinds of fatigue conditions, including chronic fatigue, ME, and of course long COVID. And there's a huge amount of crossover, as I said before. And ways in which these can play out. And we really look at ways that we need to understand these conditions. Particularly, one of the key things is the need to sprinkle rest. I often talk about sprinkling rest throughout your life and throughout your daily life, but bringing that in as a practice in the practice space. And doing lots of check-ins, lots of coming back to like mini shavasanas and checking back in and seeing where you're at now and what's needed. So really like building this really important fundamental base for ourselves as teachers, but really for our students, for those that we're working with, or our clients, depending on which arena you're working in, to empower them, because of course yoga is essentially an empowerment practice. And so we look at these fatigue conditions and ways in which we can teach that can really help support people who are struggling with these, range of symptoms, which, as we've already seen, is, particularly in terms of long COVID, but also ME/CFS, fatigue is huge. It's one of the it's usually the biggest symptom that people are experiencing. So ways in which we can really support people in our teaching approach, but also in terms of our own internal approach. So of course, all the stuff that we learn on the course, we learn, we take it in for ourselves. We may be coming as yoga teachers with the intention of imparting this information, but we take it into our bones, into our being, so that then we can live it. Because of course, we're all affected by fatigue, by stress, by any other range or host of sensations, feelings, symptoms, however we want to name them. The course also covers obviously more kind of traditional yoga philosophical teachings. We look at the gunas from the yoga model. We also look a little bit at the doshas from the sister science of Ayurveda, and how these models can help us, understand ourselves a little more clearly. We also look at some skaras, so patterns that get laid down, both in the physiology of the being, of the body, but also in the mind patterns, the ways in which we see, think, and perceive the world. We look at identification, how we identify, and how that may or may not be helpful for us in terms of the way that we perceive ourselves in the world, and the degree to which identification can indeed, just like patterns, habit patterns, samskaras can actually be, they can be helpful to some degree, and then they can perhaps become an obstacle to our living more freely and more fluidly in the world. We also look at breath, of course. I mean, breath, we look a little bit at sound and mantra. That's one of the presentations that I do on the training, pre-recorded presentations. Again, this is not a mantra sound training, but we look at it as a really important tool that often gets missed out and is often less practiced in the way in which yoga has been translated into kind of like modern Western society. So we look at the kind of more subtle tools. So breath as well. Breath is there is a presentation on breath and the relaxation response. But the teachings of breath obviously flow throughout the whole training, as it is a fundamental and crucial subject, and one that for people who have fatigue, oftentimes, if not, I would imagine probably at least 98% of the time, if not 100% of the time, there is some kind of breathing issue, which can be, playing into the whole stress response cycle. And we also cover self-compassion. So there's a whole presentation on self-compassion, there's practices on self-compassion. So, ways in which we can, again, sprinkle our practice and our daily lives with this approach of compassion and self-compassion when we notice that we are perhaps holding against ourselves, particularly when we start to do that work of uncovering those inner patterns in ourselves. So, again, we work from here out. It's not that we just learn this stuff so that we can just, impart it. We have to live it, we have to live it in ourselves. And of course, lots and lots of our past participants from the course have really have commented how beneficial they have found the course, primarily for themselves, for their own unraveling, their own inner discovery, and ways in which they can support themselves in their unraveling, if you like, of, being able to kind of like prize apart, create space in their systems where there maybe wasn't any, or there was a lack of it, or there was a clamping down. And then, of course, from that lived experience, you take that out into the classroom or into your, working with your clients, however it is you're working with them. So people will leave the course with a rich and varied and broad spectrum understanding of the kind of more modern, contemporary understandings of stress, trauma, inflammation, the physiology of that, and how it can play out. And also we look at how that can be seen, how you can see it in the classroom, how you can see certain, behaviors or body patterns of movement that really kind of are an expression of stress / burnout, or indeed fatigue in the human body, and how we can really come into help support that. So there are 10 pre-recorded practices. We meet 3 times live for this training. We have our first meeting on the 19th of November. And then we have a meeting mid-December, and then you have all that time over Christmas where most of us have a bit of a break and a bit more time. And then we have our final meet on, I think it's the 7th of January. And the pre-recorded materials get released in batches before those meetups, so that you have a few weeks to digest some of the information from the pre-recorded lectures. And we have 4 pre-recorded practices per section, for each section. So that's 12 in total. So, and the practices are taught by both, all the presentations and practices are taught by both either myself or by Charlotte. And of course the practices, what we're not teaching is this practice for this symptom, because it's never as simple as that. And I think most of us know that, but it's more of a broader understanding of how we can play with the practices, how we can use various practices and adapt practices to best suit the individual. And really, one of the key things that we are imparting is really this fine-tuning of our attunement, our ability as teachers, as therapists, as doctors, whoever we are in the world, with our identification hat on, ways in which we can really fine-tune our ability to attune to that other, and of course, again, that practice begins inwardly. To the degree that we can attune inwardly and go on our own internal investigative journey, somatically, but also in terms of our kind of like thinking mind as well, of course, not separate. To that degree, we can then attune outwardly to those around us, and really then we can really build that firm base for others where they can begin to really attune to their own inner needs in the moment, and that really is the crux of the training. And of course we look at how to incorporate some of the teaching ideas and the theory and the practices into a mainstream class, into however you may be teaching, if you are teaching yoga, or indeed if you're not teaching yoga, how you might bring it into your therapy room or your consultation room, and also how to go about setting up classes if you want to set up a specific class, a specialist class for this client group, how to go about doing that, thinking about all the different kind of factors that can come in and things that might be quite normal in a mainstream class that may or may not be appropriate, and all the considerations for this client group if you are wanting to set up specific classes. So it's a very thorough, very comprehensive. There's also a course manual that comes with the course, which is very thorough, we should be selling it really, but it comes with the course, and all the materials, all the the course manual is yours for life. All the course materials, pre-recorded materials, are available to you for a whole year, so you can go back, you can watch to your heart's content, and should you want access post that year, that's also possible. So yeah, I hope you can join us, and thanks a lot for listening.